what I experience now with virtual production, It's a little bit bleeding edge. It's a little bit fingers crossed sometimes.
Welcome to VP Land, the podcast where we take a look inside the tools, projects, and people that are changing the way we make movies. I am Joey Dowd, your host. In this episode, we talk with Jim Rider, a veteran of the visual effects industry who has transitioned into the world of virtual production. Jim shares his experience spanning the evolution of VFX from the days of optical compositing to his latest work with VP and how he sees it changing production.
It will become a go-to production tool, like building practical sets, going on location, shooting something green screen.
We dive into some of the adoption challenges of virtual production, from shifting budget allocations to helping traditional filmmakers overcome the fear of a new workflow. We also break down a spot in real time that Jim worked on for the WWE with a super tight turnaround, and what types of production he's been seeing that are usually the gateway to get more people comfortable with virtual production.
Like we did a spot, I think they had 6 completely unique set dresses and locations in one day, and we banged through all of those. That's like a sweet spot where it makes everybody agrees this is the way to do this.
Plus, we also do a deep dive on the virtual production setup at Pier59 Studios in New York, one of the largest LED volumes on the East Coast, covering everything from the LED panels to camera tracking to displays, computers, and everything else. Links for everything we talk about are available in the YouTube description or in the show notes, and be sure to subscribe to the VP Land newsletter to stay ahead of the latest tech changing the way we're making movies. Just go to vp-land.com. And now let's dive into virtual production with Jim Rider. All right, well, hi Jim, thanks for joining. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, why don't you just give us a bit of a background of your history in visual effects?
Sure. Well, I've been in visual effects and film and television for, let's just say, a number of years at this point. I started out, it's exciting because I was like in a kind of sort of I bridged 2 different eras, because when I first started out, things like compositing were still getting done optically or just getting done on videotape. And there were still a lot of things being models and miniatures being shot. This is all pre-CG and all certainly pre-digital. So I had a lot of experience and a great base of all the techniques that were used at the time to do a lot of that kind of work. And I started out in visual effects doing motion control camera operating. So I shot a lot of models and miniatures, time lapse, and all kinds of stuff like that, which was interesting because at the time that was still a not entirely robust and mature technology. There was a lot of things where we just got to figure out how to do this and get it done. Sometimes it was a bit seat of the pants. But at the end of the day, if you did it right, you'd have something really cool. I always like to say that because the mindset and the psychology of that are very similar, even though that's many years ago for me now, to what I experience now with virtual production. It's a little bit bleeding edge. It's a little bit, fingers crossed sometimes with what is, what's going on. But anyway, we'll talk more about that later, but I did a lot of, motion control. Then I got into post-production and compositing. I was a comp supervisor for a number of years. And then I kind of became a visual effects supervisor at various facilities.
When you say motion production back then, and to paint a picture, we're talking about building solutions kind of from scratch. Like there wasn't a Mark Roberts motion control where you just go buy a cinema robot or rent a cinema robot. Was this like building solutions just out of just whatever you needed to make the shot?
Exactly. I think I know a bunch of people at Mark Roberts, and I think they would say we were around then, but they weren't as widespread, and certainly I think it was pre-Milo, certainly. But yeah, a lot of the rigs that were used, the camera rigs, were either completely kit bashed, where some company or stage would just build one on their own. And there were a few, off the shelf solutions by some really clever, talented engineers who would make these rigs. Some of them are still, in use today. Things like the Graphlight and the Zebra and the rigs like that. But in terms of like solving problems, it's like I used to work for Image G in Los Angeles, and they were the company that did they were sort of like one of the two premier motion control places in Los Angeles, and the other one being General Lift, just to give them a shout out as well. But Image G, we had a full-time machinist who would need to make custom rigs to, let's say you need to do a shot where the camera needs to go and we need to see the car door open up as the camera goes into the car. It's like, okay, well, it has to repeat. So we need to build a motion control rig to be able to open the car door, things like that. So it was like building very custom. And then not to spend the whole time talking about motion control, but what's exciting is there's been with rigs like the Mark Roberts rigs and customized high-speed robots that Mark Roberts has also embraced, not the Milo, but the Bolt, which is basically a repurposed industrial robot in a Mark Roberts wrapper. With there's been like a rebirth in doing a lot of really cool high-speed stuff. So shooting, 200, 300, 400 frames a second. But probably more, using phantoms and doing a lot of like Steve Geralt in New York at the garage. That's like really awesome stuff. And they also have like an on-staff machinist because they also have to build lots of custom rigs. So
yeah. Right, it's not just the robot; it's all the other pieces to
it's
trigger,
all the other
like
stuff
the
that
food,
needs
the food videography, and all of that.
Yeah,
stuff
you have to build the rig to let the French fries go at just the right time.
The little layers of every sandwich piece.
You've seen it,
it's wild stuff.
I like that though because it's again sort of similar to the virtual production mentality of like there's a lot of upfront work, and then when you do it and you shoot it, well, look at that, we just got that in camera. And so the whole journey of like visual effects and, me like doing visual effects on shows, it's like, well, I was told the story of like, when a television season would wrap, there's a lot of people patting each other on the back and saying, great job, great working with you. See you on the next one. And I'm thinking, I still have 6 months of work to do on this TV show to put this all together. So that all of that funneled into me getting into virtual production, and I sort of haven't looked back. So
yeah, and I mean that's a good transition. So how did you get into virtual production?
I got into virtual production like many did. It was about, I would say, maybe 5 or so years ago. Like very often for my work, I do a lot of stuff where I would need pre-visualization for various sequences. And I was hearing a lot of people doing cool things using Unreal Engine to do pre-visualization. And I was like, that seems really cool. And that looks really good. I should look into that as a previs tool and doing things with virtual cameras to do pre-visualization and doing all that through Unreal Engine. So that was sort of the introduction to Unreal Engine. And then I started to hear about the cool things people were doing with LED screens and all the different overlapping technologies. And so, like many people, during the pandemic, I spent, the better part of 2020 down in my basement with Unreal Engine and a green screen and Vive trackers and trying to figure out how to get those to work, and Vive trackers on top of SLR cameras with HDMI outputs going into them, and using OBS to composite, and really just kind of wrapping my head around how it all functioned. And after doing that for a while, I was contacted by a company called Final Pixel, who's based out of London, and I did a shoot with them they did a shoot in New York, and then I did another freelance shoot with them out in LA. And actually, just as an example, I was actually working on a TV show as a VFX supervisor at the time. And Final Pixel said, hey, can you help us out with this shoot happening in LA? It's this week. And I was like, I got to figure out how to make that work. So I got somebody to cover me on the TV show, and I flew out to LA and did the virtual production shoot. And it was a promo for Dancing with the Stars with Tyra Banks. It was right during the pandemic, and the set was padlocked, and they couldn't have anybody on the stage. And so we built the virtual the Dancing with the Stars set virtually, and had Tyra Banks there. It worked out really well.
I remember there was some cool stuff I feel like I saw during the pandemic that I didn't see after, like with the kind of reality shows and like extended reality sets, like America's Got Talent. I remember did a lot of extended reality sets for some of the performances, and
Yeah.
it looked great. And then
Yeah.
I feel like it kind of went away a little bit.
Yeah, I think so.
Once they could get people like go
once
back
they
to
could
a
get people
theater and
back on
stage.
exactly. Yeah. But yeah, and then I worked full time for Final Pixel for about a year, and we did a number of things. Had the fun experience of setting up a small stage in the Brooklyn Navy Yard here in New York to do. It was like a small R&D test stage that we built, and that was a lot of fun. And I got to figure a lot of stuff out, a lot of workflows. Developing tools, testing content, all that, as well as the shoots we were doing. And then I left them, and I was basically a few months later contacted by Pier59 Studios in New York, who told me that they were building this, which if I had I was going to use it as a virtual background, but I couldn't figure it out. But I was going to put the stage behind me, but
we can show an image of it.
Maybe you can show it when you put this together. But yeah, they said that we're building, and I'd been on a number of virtual production stages by that time. And I was like, oh, this is a serious install that they're doing here. It's highest end install, certainly in New York City, and the largest volume currently in New York City. I'm sure somebody will build something bigger, but yeah, it's, they basically needed a virtual production supervisor to help make sure that it's run properly and that we're doing things right, and our clients' needs are met, our clients' creative needs are translated into the virtual production world. That's where I am now.
I didn't realize the Final Pixel history. It's come full circle. They were the very first podcast guests on the show.
You know what? You could edit this out, but yeah, when you and I were doing this, I shot Michael McKenna a note and I said, "Hey, I'm doing this podcast. Do you know do you know Joey?"
Yeah. We talked a lot about their Red Bull F1 spot they did last year.
Yes. Yeah. No, I give them a lot of credit. They have great tenacity for holding on, because it's a challenge to, and we can talk about this if you like this.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to tell me about, because you kind of early on compared, your early work in motion control and the Wild West of figuring that out to where we're at right now in virtual production. So, I mean, what are some of the similarities you've seen, and also just in figuring out virtual production and getting people to adopt virtual production?
Well, I will say that, and let's just say, when we're talking virtual production, when I'm using that term, I am mainly talking about, in my case, ICVFX, in-camera visual effects.
LED wall.
LED wall, yeah. Virtual production has, it's a big umbrella term which sort of encompasses,
That could be Avatar, Lion King of virtual cameras in a
CG
virtual world, but yeah, we're talking about
motion capture. So ICVFX, LED walls.
Background,
Yeah, and there is a lot of stuff to figure out, and a lot of interdependent technologies that need to work in order for that to work as seamlessly as it needs to work to be successful. And that comes from just doing it for a while and banging away at it, finding what the pitfalls are. And what are the things are that's going to make this A, work, and B, look good. What I do find now is that the nuts and bolts technology of how to do that kind of work has been essentially sorted. It works. You have to figure out how to make it work, but that works now. And if somebody comes in now, people are always pushing the envelope. Hopefully we're pushing the envelope of like, oh, but what if we did this, and can we try this, and try to push it a bit. But Unreal Scene on the volume, with camera tracking, with image-based lighting, which is another thing we have going on at Pier59, which is cool. We've got that sorted. Now, the challenge is not getting it to work or making sure that the process works. The challenge is now people adopting it. That's really the challenge. In parallel with that there's these envelope pushing technologies of like, oh, let's try this, let's try that, let's try, how do G-Splats look on the wall? Let's keep trying new things and seeing how they go. But the basics are there. The adoption is, and I feel like I've been talking about that aspect of it for like the last 4 years, about the challenge of that.
Of just people using it as a viable alternative to other green screen or building a set or just other practical other ways to filming.
It will become a like go-to production tool, like building practical sets, going on location, shooting something green screen, doing, practical, process trailer car driving, if that's what you want, if that's how you want to do that work. And yes, virtual production, but that last one is still not quite in people's vocabulary as far as like when they're doing like a breaking down a script, say like, oh, we're going to build this as a standing set because it's in every episode. So that makes economic sense. These would be great for practical location these days. And these, we'll do a week of virtual production at the end of the schedule and we'll bang out these scenes because that's the best way to do those scenes. I don't think people are thinking that right now. Quite. Some shows, if you're doing Fallout, yes. But if you're doing just a narrative television program, I still don't know if it's quite on the go-to list of techniques. The one that's going to be sort of the gateway drug and people are doing this all the time already, the gateway drug for virtual production in mainstream production is car process work, which it's not the sexiest work, but it gets people in there to see like, oh my gosh, this works great. We have 360-degree driving plates. Those driving plates are being mapped using image-based lighting. They're being pixel mapped to all the lighting fixtures. And we barely need to move the camera because then when we want to do different angles, we just rotate the vehicle. And we're getting all of those reflections from the ceiling, from wild walls, and it just looks good. And I've done a lot of green screen driving comps over the years, and I don't really ever want to do another one. Because they never look as good as they should. But I feel like when people come in and do that, they realize it. Or even, we do a lot of work where the client either doesn't have the time or doesn't have the budget, or they sort of can't wrap their head around a full 3D Unreal environment. And honestly, for a lot of the creative, it's like, well, you don't really need that. This could totally be a 2D plate running on the volume. And honestly, I would even sometimes say that's actually the best solution for what a client is particularly looking to do. And a lot of people come in and they sort of get their feet wet with that. And then we can sort of say, well, if we introduce camera tracking to this, you would get that much more of a better result. And if it were a 3D scene, now you could do shots that look like this. So that's it. There's a bit of a walk before you run aspect with the adoption.
What are some of the common barriers for adoption? Is it just new process unknown? Is it, budget? They know it's just going to be higher per day, but maybe it makes more sense in the long run. Is it something else?
It's an overlapping, like on one level, it is purely a budget thing. Not that the money is not there, but the money is just in a different pile. It's like you could say, well, if you do this, you're going to have some more upfront production. You might have some more upfront production costs to do some VAD work and some asset work. So let's say we need a few weeks to do that kind of work, but you're not going to have to do any post-production aside from editorial and color. Mm-hmm. And they're like, I get that, but that's a different pile of money. I do the production budget, So sometimes it's just that. Another challenge is schedule. Very often clients will be, we need to do a handheld in a Paris cafe. Could you guys build that as a virtual environment? And we need to shoot next Tuesday. It's like, no, because you're not going to get that by next Tuesday. But, we can offer this, or if you could give us a little more time. So very often it's schedule.
Right, you're flipping, and now you got to do all of your virtual art design and stuff beforehand.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, things, and I try to equate things with, because I do very much come out of production background. So I try to equate roles and mentalities with how they are in a physical production world. Like, well, if you had to build a practical set, well, that would take a certain amount of time. And people would say, well, we can't build a set in 2 days. Well, you can't build a virtual set in 2 days either, And so, there's the physical art department and the virtual art department. But another, barrier is, I think there is a fear factor of like, well, I know how to make, if I'm a producer, it's like, I know how to make a television show. I've been making television shows for 25 years. So why should I do this? And they need a compelling reason. And for most producers, the compelling reason is it's going to cost less money. And the circumstances under which, the cost, unless there's really no other way to do it. Like there are some use cases where, and it is a money thing. I'm just thinking of an example of like, if you're doing a car work, and yes, I was talking about, it's great. You can get all these real reflections in the vehicle. Well, that's with a photorealistic background, like photographed plates. But what if you want to do something that was more graphic, and you wanted to have graphics that were sweeping over the vehicle in the reflections and all of that? Well, to do that in post-production would be prohibitive. People wouldn't bother because they would have to build the car in CG and they'd have to 3D track everything and they would have to add these reflections in post. It's like, in that case, virtual production is a money-saving way to do it. It is the better way to do it. But for most use cases, the savings come in when you have, multiple locations, multiple setups that you need to do in 1 or 2 days, and you need to do them quickly. That's where it really starts to make sense, where we need to do, the talent in Paris and the talent in London. Like we did a spot like, I don't know, a couple of months ago. It's like I think they had 6 completely unique set dresses and locations in one day. And we banged through all of those. And that's like a sweet spot where it makes everybody agrees this is the way to do this.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Let's talk about the Pier59 setup. What kind of, you mentioned it's currently the biggest virtual stage in New York. What's the kind of tech setup like? Sure.
We have a 65-foot by about 18 feet high curved LED main wall made up of planar 2.6 millimeter pixel pitch. Pixel pitch is if from a distance, an LED wall looks like a constant image, but just like your television, if you go close enough to it, the LED wall is actually made up of individual pixels, and they are, by a television standards, still a bit coarse. So if you're standing right up against it, you can see the pixels, and the distance from one pixel to the next is the pixel pitch. So ours are 2.6 millimeter, and the finer the pixel pitch, the more expensive the panels are. There's some other compromises there, but the finer the pixel pitch, the more expensive they are. But it's also, you're pushing that many more pixels to the wall now. So now you're adding more processing power. Yeah. We found, and I think other people have as well, that 2.6 is sort of a sweet spot where it, from the distance that you'll be shooting at typically from the wall, it's a sweet spot of looking still really nice on camera. But, any coarser than that, and then you would start to see the pixels. And it's really the evolution of these panels in the last few years that has led to this virtual production, if you want to call it explosion. But basically it's like Unreal Engine's gotten, so much better. The pixel pitch of the panels and camera tracking has gotten much more accessible to buy and configure and set up. All of that together is.
And what about the color out of the LED displays? Have you seen evolution there as well? Or problems that had to be overcome because they weren't initially made for?
Yes, you raise a very good point. One of the I don't know, it's not like a dirty secret, but one of the things you often hear people say, and honestly,
I think when I brought this up at MAD, they're like, our dirty secret. These were meant for like stages and stuff, not for filming.
Well, yeah, they
were meant for stages. Yeah, they're for live concerts. I mean, that's where like a lot of these companies had their backgrounds in, anyways.
Yeah, they were made for live, for stage events and to hang on the sides of buildings. They were not made to be photographed against, and they certainly were not made to be used as a lighting fixture. Because one of the things that we say, and to be perfectly honest, I've said it myself, which is like, and we can circle back to Pier59 setup. Yeah, in addition to our curved 65-foot wall, we have an LED ceiling that's articulated, that's on chain motors that can come down, which is great when you're doing something like a car work or anything that's reflected. But we have 4 wild walls that are 5 feet wide and 12 feet high. What are those for? Well, they can also be brought in to sort of flank the camera to be used for additional reflections.
Are these the same LED panels, or are these?
They are exactly the same LED panels.
Okay.
Yeah. Which simplifies a number of things, but everything's the same. But
you can bring them physically.
You can
closer,
bring them physically in, yeah.
So you get a bit more output out of them. Okay.
And we use them for reflections all the time. And yes, they can be used as a lighting source. So if I'm looking at you and I've got the main wall behind you, but then facing you, I've got two of our wild walls, and I'm mapping the same content onto those wild walls that I'm mapping to the main wall. Well, to a point, you're now being lit by the same light that is happening on the LED wall. And that's a good thing. However, the light that's actually coming off of those panels is not very good light. It looks good if you're shooting it with a camera, but when it bounces off the human skin, you get some odd color effects. And it's because the LED panels are not full spectrum like the sun or like an incandescent bulb. If you look at it, you've got like a spike where there's red, green, and blue. So there's certain colors that they cannot actually reproduce. And when those bounce off your skin, they can make you look weird and not particularly flattering. So what's the solution to that? The solution is to use a full spectrum lighting source that's capable of using what we call image-based lighting. So one of the things, when you talk about for color, no, using the LED panels for a light source is not a great idea. But we have these 3 arrays of Quasar Science double rainbow LED fixtures. And what they can do is they don't just have RGB LEDs in them. They're called RGB WW. So they have 2 whites in them as well as RGB. So they're capable of producing a full spectrum of light. Now we can take our Unreal content or any content and map it to those light fixtures. Plus they're much brighter than the wild walls. And
does
now
having the extra white also increase the brightness? Is that what contributes to
it's
more
output? That it gives you a warm white and a cool white. And there's just the kind of LEDs that are in them. They're bigger LEDs physically. Each tube has 2 rows of 24 LEDs in them, and the tubes are 4 feet long. So that's 1 LED every, whatever it is, inch. I have to do the math.
Right. Okay.
2 inches.
I'm thinking too of like the Kinoflow mimic lights, where they're not meant to be filmed as a background. They're meant to light with image-based lighting.
Yes, exactly. And that's actually that's a slightly different, same idea, the technology of how they're doing it versus how Quasar is doing it. It's a different protocol. Actually, Quasars are a DMX controllable light fixture. So the whole thing works as a lighting device through DMX protocols. Whereas the Mimic, the way they did it is clever because it's simpler, honestly. It is essentially a LED panel that's taking a video signal and mapping it to the fixture. Like it's using a video processor, just like our main wall does. That leads to some interesting things, by the way, on a set of like, whose responsibility is it to deal with the fixtures? Because if you're using the Quasar Science fixture, it'd be the lighting department. But if you're using a Mimic fixture, that's more like a video playback device now. So
that's an interesting debate. How have you solved that so far?
Honestly, I just know it's something that people talk about. I have been on sets where it's kind of come up of like, whose job is it to operate there was one job I was on where we were using a system from Roscoe, which basically is essentially like an interactive translate background. Imagine a 100-foot long LED wall, 40 feet high, that is outside the window of a set. And so when you look outside the window of that set, we're mapping onto it very high resolution photographic backgrounds of New York City, say, and it looks real, it looks good. But because it's all being driven through Unreal Engine, we can change the time of day on it.
That's right. I think I saw a demo of that. It was on the Soderbergh show.
Yes.
HBO. Yeah.
Full circle. Full circle? Yeah.
That sounds right. Yes.
Yeah,
I think I saw
that
their
sounds
case study about it. Right.
Yeah.
And it was like an iPad device and they could just walk around set and just like drag like daytime, nighttime.
Yeah. So there's a question of whose responsibility is that iPad?
Who has the iPad?
Is it video playback because the wall is being driven as a video device, or is it a lighting device and it should be controlled by the lighting department? I wasn't going to get involved in that discussion. But it is interesting. Different technologies.
Right. How do we fit this into a system that's existed for 100 years with these with new roles and new technology?
Yeah. I can tell you a little bit more about Pier59.
Yeah, we go back to Pier59. Yeah. So we talked about the LED panels. What else do we have at Pier59?
Okay. So what we're using to map content to the wall is Disguise, a system called Disguise, if your viewers are familiar with that. And that is a system it's a media server system that is capable of mapping any kind of 2D content to any kind of video surface that you have. And so if you were seeing a stage show and there were 30 LED screens and projection screens all happening on stage, it's most likely being run with Disguise. So it's a natural fit for Disguise to be in the LED virtual production world. But what's great about Disguise also is, of course, we can map 2D content like, stills, plates, and apply any kind of effects or looks to them, map them, move them, animate them, whatever we want to do. But they also have an infrastructure built in that uses Unreal Engine. So there are 3 render nodes from Disguise that their only job is to run Unreal Engine. And so the workflow for that, just really briefly, is we have a camera tracking system, which the position of the camera will go into our Disguise media server. The Disguise media server says, hey, render nodes, render me out a frame that is correct for this camera position at this moment in time. The media server gets that frame back from the render nodes and then pumps it out to the video wall. And that happens 24 times a second.
And this is also focusing resources to like just high quality render what you need in camera, like the frustum.
Yes, exactly. And Disguise also Unreal has now gotten better at this. You'll often hear people talk about how are you running your Unreal virtual production infrastructure, and people will talk about they're often using Disguise, or they'll say, oh, we're using vanilla Unreal, meaning we're doing all of the projection mapping, and we're doing all of that within Unreal Engine itself. What's good about doing it with Disguise is it sort of abstracts the creative, basically the visual artist that's sort of leading the look of that Unreal scene on stage. Their work is kind of abstracted from what the Disguise operator is doing, which is they're more in charge of getting that now up onto the wall. And also Disguise can, assign a certain amount of render nodes to that inner frustum on the main wall and allocate resources in an intelligent way. So it's like, well, we want to devote more resources to the inner frustum and much less resources to the outer frustum, which could be done at a much lower resolution because the camera's never going to see it. And also Disguise has really robust calibration procedures in place. So the idea of like spatially calibrating your camera to your LED wall, that's a very streamlined, efficient process in Disguise. So once you set that up, getting an Unreal scene assuming the scene has been optimized, we can talk about that, but assuming the scene runs well, getting the Unreal scene prepped to fire it up on the LED wall is pretty straightforward.
Right, because your stage is already built, not really changing, and it's calibrated.
Exactly,
so
yeah.
Set.
Yeah.
So someone can bring you the Unreal.
People bringing us Unreal scenes, there's a whole process that we often have to do to make sure that scene actually is properly optimized.
What's the short version of the highlight reel of optimizing an Unreal scene?
The short version is if you're a client who has a scene that's being created by an outside VAD, virtual art department, I always say, please give us that scene as soon as possible, as early in your look development process as possible. Even better if people are familiar with Perforce, which is a version control software. If an outside client is using Perforce, and basically real quick, that's a cloud-based version control system where the client working on the VAD would make changes to their scene and upload them to the cloud. And then I at Pier59 could then pull down those changes, and everything is sort of write protected so that I can never overwrite something that somebody else is working on. What's great about working that way is as soon as they have a scene, they can share me the project file and I can start working with it on stage. And as their scene continues to progress and get look devved, we can just download the updates for it. So it's a very they go up to the cloud, I pull it down. It's much more efficient than let me zip up another Dropbox version of the project for you. And now so, but the things that are, there's a lot of just general philosophies about building a scene for an LED stage that are different from how you would build it for, say, a game. Because for the most part, we're not building worlds that we need to fly through and travel through and have be expansive. It's like we're building a scene that's going to be photographed from this general vicinity in the world. That's where the action takes place. And everything outside of that can be substantially dumbed down in a way that makes it look still just as good. But for instance, past a certain distance in the 3D scene, in the Unreal scene, things don't even need to be three-dimensional anymore. Now you could put things on 2D cards and things like that. And just keeping that kind of philosophy in mind is a huge efficiency. There's a whole checklist of things, we don't need to have 8K textures in the scene. Just being a lot of things have gotten better in terms of complex geometry can be. That's not as much of a concern as it used to be, but really you don't know how it's going to run on the wall until we try it out. So I'm always like, give us the scene.
Get it earlier.
Yeah.
Oh, other hardware. What's your tracker and everything?
We have a Stipe Red Spy tracker.
Okay.
And we are, my personal experience is I've worked a lot with the Moses system, OptiTrack, the Red Spy. They're all great. They all have their pros and cons, but we're very happy with the Stipe Red Spy. It's robust. It, essentially it just always works, which is all of these high-end tracking systems. The great thing about them is, you turn them on and they just work. They're usually the last thing you have to worry about. This has nothing to do with Stipe, but, every job has gotchas with it. And we just did a job recently where we put the camera on the head of the techno crane and realized they wanted to do a lot of low angle shots tilting up. So just to tell people how the Stipe system works is it has a kind of a small soda can looking device on top of the motion picture camera that's pointing up to the ceiling at hundreds of retroreflective dots. And so it knows the pattern of those dots on the ceiling and it's able to interpolate where the camera is. But if it can't see those dots, then it can't track. And it's got it's very robust error correction, but still, so the problem we were having was, the camera's tilting up and looking right into the arm, right into the body of the techno crane. And so we would lose track. And so that was unfortunate, but there's a lot of things people can do on their own that can get them involved with camera tracking and virtual production where you don't need to have the, tens of thousands of dollars to buy a Stipe or a Moses. We just purchased a new, I don't know how new it is, but it's called the Retracker Bliss. Familiar with that?
No, I haven't heard of that one.
It's like a few $1,000s, and I hear very good things about it. It's sort of in the same tracking world, price point wise, as Vive Mars.
Right.
Which is
them I know is the most, pretty much most accessible, affordable. 5,000 for the kit, but with the dedicated hardware. Because I did the same thing that you did in the pandemic, where I bought the trackers before they had the Mars kit.
Oh, sure.
And then I realized, and then I learned, you have to jailbreak it because it's not supposed to work without a headset because it was built for virtual reality.
Well, I could nerd out with you on that. You're changing. I'm down there trying to you're changing config files and all this stuff.
Yeah, to go on the Facebook groups and be like, hey, how do I fix this? And then the Facebook groups are very helpful. But anyway, sorry.
Eventually, that's why when I finally got it working, like got the Vive on my SLR, it actually worked. I was like, and then once you...
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, like once you get past that, then you're like, well, I never want to do that again. And then they came out with the Mars, and now you don't need to do it.
Right, and now it's specifically built for virtual production and not having to jailbreak their VR headset. And then, we just saw at NAB Jet Set Cine, which turns your iPhone into an on-camera tracker.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so it's not like you have to, because I've seen a lot of solutions where you have to film through the iPhone for this solution, but this one, they can do the offset on any other camera. I'm not entirely sure if it's like got the same like quality for doing in camera, but definitely if you're shooting on a green screen and want to do just some compositing later and you have the camera tracking data.
Sure.
Super easy way. But what was the other, so what was this other option you were saying?
It's called Retracker Bliss. Check it out. I mean, it's just based on the look of it. I imagine the technology is similar to NCAM, which it's using a stereoscopic, sensor camera on the front. So it's determining its position that way, but it's also got an IMU, an inertial motion unit. I think that's what that stands for. So it's also capable of knowing like when it's moving and when it's not moving. And
does it like mount on top of the camera or
you mount it in front of the camera? Okay. And apparently, I mean, for the price, it's very robust. So we're actually putting in a smaller LED wall in one of our secondary stages now. That's going to be about 20 feet by 12 feet high. And honestly, it was like, well, this is really for people who probably aren't even going to want to do camera tracking, really more for some of those walk before you run type situations where we just need video or stills as a background. We're going to run as the media server. We're going to use Simulate Live Effects. And so, but it was like, well, we should have some camera tracking solution, but really couldn't justify, and it wasn't necessary to get like a Stipe or a Moses. So we went with this retracker. So I haven't received it yet, but once it gets here, I'm happy to report back.
Does it need trackers on the floor or the ceiling, or does it just use the existing objects like
it just use the existing objects?
So Zeiss.
Yeah. I'm curious. I'm sure there's a point at which you could break it, not physically, but where it will fail. And I would just be curious what that is. But I imagine for most things,
for studio work, that should work fine because I could just probably use the rafters or whatever that doesn't change.
Yeah. What else do we have? We
computers, monitors. We
have so our what many people call the brain bar, but we don't like to call it that. We call it our mission control, just because I'm tired of hearing brain bar. So we have basically the disguise systems are in our equipment racks there. We've got upstream and downstream matrix switchers so that we can route any video signal from anywhere to anywhere. So that makes it very flexible for us. We've got 2 PC workstations that are accessible on stage, and all of our on stage workstations. Basically, we've got 3 workstations on our mission control, but the entire infrastructure is all KVM'd together so that anybody at any workstation can access any machine. So, and we also have this system KVM from our virtual production office. What's good about that is anybody, whether you're the Unreal artist, the disguise op, me, can sit at any desk and connect to any machine. And the monitors that we have we have these very nice Asus ProArt monitors on stage that are for the operators. And then on the stage itself, we have a really nice Asus 32-inch studio monitor, which is great because that's a great monitor to look at when you want to see what the feed from the camera is actually going to look like. So the DITs, often there's usually a DIT there as well. They have their own monitors, but they really like this monitor as well.
Are they working off the Asus monitor? Or they're using that as like a set monitor, but they still have
kind of a set
DIT
monitor,
station.
like a gut check. It's like, well, this is what our monitor looks like. And everything is all very well, and it's very satisfying when you see this. Everything is all very well calibrated so that we have when you look at the LED wall and you look at the camera feed of the camera that's shooting that LED wall, and you see that camera feed on the Asus monitor, and you look at those two things side by side, well, they look pretty darn near, I mean, it's barring any kind of LUT on the camera that's adding a look, but they look pretty darn similar. We also have a artist's, workstation that's a Asus PC that we use for Unreal Engine, development. I think it's called a ProArt PC. That's got like a really beefy, I think it's got a 4080 graphics card in it. And that's a really solid Unreal Engine machine. But we also have a Asus Studio Book, which is great because that's more of a it's a laptop. And what's great about that's also got a really excellent screen on it. It's a really beefy laptop. And what's great about that is it just has the mobility to be able to work remotely and still be able to get performance. But it gives you something where, I can take that on set and like show somebody or go to a meeting at a client and show them on that laptop, well, this is what this Unreal scene is looking like. And it's going to be a very good representation of what it will look like when we get back to the studio, when we look at it on our other Asus monitors, and when we see it on the LED wall. So it's a great little adjunct to have.
Yeah, it sounds like powerful enough to work on it, but also you can portable enough you could bring it around and keep it mobile. Yeah,
and the screen on it is got the fidelity, so that's a really good thing as well. What else do we have at Pier 59? We've got. I'm literally like going down our equipment rack. Yeah. There's all sorts of audio capabilities as well, which is not as much my world, but if people do need it, we've got all that built in our equipment rack as well. We've got, like I said, we've got our Quasar Science fixtures. We've got, iPad. Everything's all mapped to handily mapped to an iPad, so we can, control different parameters from whether it's 2D scene, whether we're controlling parameters in Disguise or controlling parameters in Unreal Engine, having all those controls on an iPad on the set while you're standing next to somebody. When they say, could you make the sky bluer, to be able to have that like right at your fingertips is really handy. So yeah. And what else do we have? We have, we talked about camera tracking. And our in-house camera. We have a red Komodo as our in-house camera. Honestly, we don't typically use that for client shoots. It's only actually come up once where somebody said, hey, can we use your Komodo? But we keep it, it sits with the red spy on it. It stays calibrated. It's got a global shutter. It, looks really good. And if a client did want to use it, it's good to go. If a client wants to come in and needs camera tracking, then we just, we've shot with, Venices, Alexa Minis, Mini LFs rather, and we just calibrate those lenses in advance and put our red spy on their camera, and everything works great.
Have you been using the new Sony DP tools? I know they came out with a couple for like moire warning and color calibration.
No. And I don't want to misspeak, but I think to do that requires their panels.
Oh, you might be right.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure either. That actually might be true. Okay.
But no, I've heard good things. Unfortunately, I wasn't at NAB this year because luckily we were working. So that's a good reason not to be able to go to NAB. But yeah, I couldn't make it. But last year, that was one of the big talks, was all those VP tools from Sony. Was going on for the last year.
But yeah, I think you might be right about the panels. I forgot about that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also don't know if it's like, I don't know if it's their panels and it has to be a Venice. I'm not sure what all the...
Right, I think the Venice part, yes, but yeah, you might be right about the panels. WWE spot. You want to talk about it?
Oh, sure. A few weeks ago, it was really only a few weeks ago. Actually, it was just about a month ago now. We got contacted by View Studios, who we've had some back and forth with, and we have a relationship with them. And it was very short notice. They wanted to shoot the cold open for their shooting it. And so there was not time for post-production. And so basically we got an Unreal Engine scene only a few days before the shoot. And, I worked with their Unreal artists to get it, tricked out, optimized. And we built one of the challenges you'll often hear people talk about is set blending of blending the real into the virtual. Like, it's still a cool thing to see for me to film you against the LED wall with a 3D scene and move the camera, and I can see that perspective of that 3D world changing behind you. And that still looks good even if I'm seeing you from the waist up. But what if I want to see a set piece or a floor, or if I want to see where your feet are joining the floor? Well, then we have to art direct a practical floor, which needs to visually blend into the virtual floor. And Unreal has a whole bunch of techniques and color correction volumes and all sorts of things that we can do to make that blend happen. But it's still equal parts art and science to get that blend, and also working with the practical, the director of photography to get that blend so that the practical set is indeed lit to match the virtual set. And we sort of like, oh, you're keyed from the right-hand side in the Unreal scene, so I have to key it. Or there's back and forth, and they'll say to us, can you move your key light so we're lighting it from this side? So we had to do a bunch of that for this WWE spot. There was a practical, it was like the set piece was a stairway leading up to an elevated train.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to try it first here. I've never played this, but I have the video loaded. Let me play it. I think you can.
Well, there you go.
Right, so we've got, that's just Philly shots.
This is all teaser. Okay, now we're in the virtual set here. This is that's practical set there. That's
right, so
a practical set. So that staircase right into that virtual staircase, which is continuing behind him.
Right, so first tier here would be a real set, and then this.
So that banister you're seeing behind his head, that's part of the virtual set, and the banister you're seeing, on camera right, frame right, next to him is the real set. And so that, in order to get that to work, requires, and that railing is in the virtual environment as well.
Right. So in that shot with The Rock and my lack of wrestling knowledge of three other guys. Exactly. It was just, everything was virtual.
Yeah. And then this is all, he's basically entirely walking up the virtual stairs there. Full disclosure, we did all of the stuff with Meek Mill, all of the other stuff with The Rock, just in case anybody sees this. They're like, you didn't shoot that there. They intercut some stuff from a previous shoot of The Rock into this teaser.
So was that a different shoot of the...
Yeah.
With The Rock?
There is another teaser of this that just has the Meek Mill stuff in it that's somewhere online, which has less stuff that you have to sift through to see the stuff that we did. And I think let's see if there's a shot at the end. Yeah, that's more of the real, the virtual.
And then that, whatever that was.
And then there's a shot, there should be, there's a bunch of shots of him up on a roof. But yeah, it was interesting because we got, I don't always like, I usually don't like, there you go.
That's the roof shot. Yeah.
And that's the roof shot. And we had, so basically we did, and then there was another scene that we did, which was like going up an elevator. So we were like revealing this city, passing by us as we went. But there was a lot of last minute changes to this scene. Like, for instance, in a perfect world, if you had time, you would previs every single shot, and you would have a digital representation of that practical set piece that they built. You'd have that in the Unreal scene. It would be that, and then what you would do, so that staircase that he was sitting on would be in the Unreal scene, and we'd have like a mannequin or a metahuman in there temporarily sitting on the stairs, and we'd be able to say like, this will be our first camera move, and we'd start mocking up some cameras. And then would
this also kind of test like, if you shift the perspective, that the physical set piece is going to match the perspective of the digital stairs as digital set piece.
Yeah. Now, this was quick. They had to build that scene quickly. The scene looked really nice, but there were some optimization things that had to happen to it. But then also, once they got the physical set piece built, it's like, well, this doesn't really, spatially, it doesn't quite match what the digital equivalent there is. So on set, we were literally like moving banisters and moving the stairway and changing the virtual set of what's on the LED wall to make it line up with the real set. And, it was stressful at the time because it's like, oh, this isn't lining up. But then we would get it lined up, and the shots looked good in the end. And in the end, it was some fist bumps that we got it all done.
Would this have been possible without virtual production to do this spot in this time frame?
I would say no. Then that's the perfect example, because it was such a quick turnaround. The only other way to do it, if you didn't compromise the creative, would be to shoot Meek Mill on green screen and then composite that whole set behind him. And then if you didn't shoot it with camera tracking, it's like, okay, well, it's just, standard visual effects techniques. You've got to 3D track the shot. You've got to render out the CG with this matching camera move. You've got to take into account the lens distortion of the lens that shot it. So you have to shoot lens grids. And then you've got to composite all of that. And if you look at it, there's all this cool, this cool atmosphere. You wouldn't have been able to get it done. It wouldn't have looked as good, and it would have taken you too long. And to a producer, it would have cost too much to do it non-virtual production. So there is a version of this that could be done with standard visual effects, but not in the time frame that this had to be completed by.
Yeah. You mentioned G-Splats, Gaussian Splats. Have you been experimenting with those, and has anything else sort of in the AI realm been on your radar?
Actually, we're just about to do a big workshop with a client to show off like a whole variety of virtual production techniques. So and it's for an audience of potential clients that don't necessarily understand about virtual production or why they would want to use it or how they could use it. And so we'll be covering, everything from, still frames as backgrounds, stock footage, 2D stock footage as backgrounds, with and without camera tracking, 3D Unreal, but we'll be definitely getting into showing some, stand environments and G-Splats on the wall as well to show what those look like. There's a lot of promise there. Honestly, I haven't used one on a job yet. I've seen some things that it's like, wow, that looks really good. And for the amount of effort that it would have taken to create it, that looks really good compared to, say, building it from scratch. There's still some aspects of it that aren't quite there yet. Like, oh, but there's some holes there that need to be filled, or that doesn't look good from this angle. And, but it's very promising. Disguise has integrated workflow with assets, from Volinga. So the idea is you could use Volinga assets, because Disguise is itself it's a 3D workspace. And when you're looking in Disguise, you can see, our stage, our screens, where the camera is, in a 3D viewport. And you can import, a Volinga asset right into Disguise, and you don't even need Unreal Engine. That's a workflow that I do find interesting, because it would just simplify things.
And Volinga, there's an app you could like scan a room with your phone, turn it into a 3D asset, and so then you're saying you could just import it into a 3D asset into Disguise. Yeah.
Now, with a lot of things, it's like, but is that asset good enough? And then you're always like, well, for the amount of time it would take to create something, it might be good enough. And you have to be careful with your clients, because there's certain caveats, like maybe we can't let it get that sharp. But if you're telling me, client, that the background's going to be sort of like far away and it's probably going to go a little photographically out of focus, and that could be a great solution. But you might run up into a situation where, oh, but for this shot, it doesn't work and it starts to fall apart. So I kind of feel the same way but I have my eye on all that stuff as, exciting technologies, definitely. As far as the AI goes, obviously it's the talk of the moment, and I see lots of exciting things getting done. Honestly, we have used it more for, storyboard style frames, mood boards, look dev, like give me something that looks like this. And it's a good way to, shorthand between clients and us about, mood or look. And is this how you see this feeling in terms of creating like final imagery that we're going to use like on the volume? There are workflows for that. Again, Disguise has a workflow with Kubrick to do 2.5D. I sort of like looked at it, haven't completely dug into that completely, but a lot of the at times frustrating thing is it's like, okay, I need a background of a, I don't know, city street, ground level, it's raining and, we're in San Francisco, whatever, make that up. And I could get like a really nice looking frame. And then I could say, okay, that's great, but that's not really the angle I want or the angle that I need for this shot, and I want to be able to say, boom the camera up 10 feet. Mm-hmm. But I can't do that because then I'll just get a completely different frame. I find if we really want to use it as a content creation tool, it's like you have to be able to do things that way. You have to be able to give it definable parameters. That's all going to come. But that's part of it. That customizability of it is not there yet, at least in terms of what I've seen. There might be something out there I'm not aware of.
No, I mean, that's a common issue of just having that fine-tuned control over the camera. You say move it up and it'll regenerate a completely different scene that, you may or may not get what you want.
So and that can be
in usability.
And there's still a very often, I mean, some things I see, I'm like, damn, that looks really good. And then there's still some things where it's like, that looks really good, but still has that, who made this, weird AI look to it, Yeah. So bottom line, or to summarize, it's like we've used it, but we at least are not quite using it for final pixel content creation yet, but it's on the list.
Yeah, last one. I know you weren't at NAB, but we're recording this like the week after. Anything pop up on your radar that was new and interesting?
I wish I was at NAB, and the reason I couldn't go is we were so busy last week with what we had going on at the Pier that I haven't even caught up on what all the developments were. The biggest thing that and this isn't NAB related, but I was like, I got to get Unreal 5.4. I got to dig into that because that's got some cool stuff in it. That's my as far as the next new thing that I have to dig into.
Well, cool. Thanks a lot, Jim. I appreciate the time. And thanks a lot for all the insight.
This was a pleasure, Joey. Thanks so much for a good chat. I look forward to seeing it when we're all done.
And that's it for this episode of VP Land. Links for everything we talked about are in the show notes. Just head over to vp-land.com. If you found this episode useful and interesting, please leave a comment on YouTube or a 5-star review in your podcast app of choice. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next episode.